Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are focusing our lens on a figure who is, well, he's basically the original rock star of the Enlightenment.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, I want you to picture this guy. He gets thrown into the Bastille for writing scandalous verses about the government. He gets exiled like multiple times. He becomes a millionaire by gaming a lottery.
Right, a rigged lottery scheme.
And on top of all that, he reportedly drank somewhere between 40 and 50 cups of coffee a day.
50? I mean, can you even imagine? And amidst all that caffeine and chaos, he somehow managed to write over 20,000 letters and, 2,000 books and pamphlets?
It's a level of productivity that is, frankly, it's just exhausting to even think about.
It really is.
Exactly. So we're talking about François-Marie Arouet.
Better known to history, of course, as Voltaire.
Right, Voltaire. But the mission for this deep dive isn't just to look at the marble statue of the old man with the cynical smile you see in a museum.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get past the famous quotes, some of which, as we'll find out, he didn't even say. We want to really understand the mechanics of his mind, how he turned wit from, a parlor trick into a lethal political weapon.
It really was a weapon.
Yeah.
He engaged in this lifelong crusade against what he called l'infâme.
The infamous thing.
The infamous thing. And by that, he meant organized intolerance, religious fanaticism, state-sponsored persecution. But, and this is the crucial part we need to get into today, Voltaire is a figure of massive, uncomfortable contradictions.
Called the Voltaire paradox.
Precisely. He's the champion of tolerance who held views on race and religion that are, they're deeply problematic and frankly shocking to modern ears.
Yeah.
He's a man who sought for the little guy but desperately craved the approval of kings. He preached, humble gardening but lived like an absolute lord.
So we've got a massive stack of sources to get through. We have biographical records from the 18th century, his personal letters, which are just a treasure trove of gossip and philosophy, his philosophical dictionary.
And, of course, modern historical analyses that try to sort of reconcile all these contradictions.
Exactly. So let's start at the very beginning. Before he was Voltaire, the titan of literature, he was just a kid named Zozo.
That's right. Zozo was the family nickname for young François-Marie Arouet, born in Paris in 1694.
Okay.
Now, his father, on paper, was François Arouet, a notary, a minor treasury official, a solid bourgeois middle-class life.
Right.
But Voltaire, being a provocateur from pretty much the moment he could speak, claimed later in life that he was actually the illegitimate son of a nobleman, a minor poet named Guérin de Rochebrune.
That is such a telling detail. Most people, especially back then, would try to hide an illegitimate birth. It was a huge stigma.
Oh, absolutely.
But he actively campaigned for it. It's like he was saying, my dad's a lawyer. No way. Impossible. I'm too talented for that. I must be secret nobility.
It fits his psychology perfectly. He was just desperate to separate himself from the mundane. He was the youngest of 5 kids, and his mother passed away when he was only 7. Yeah, so that left him in a house dominated by his father and his older brother, and he didn't get along with either of them. So he was sent to be educated by the Jesuits at the college Louis le Grand.
And this is a really critical piece of the puzzle, right? The Jesuits gave him the tools he'd later use to dismantle the church.
They taught him how to argue. They taught him rhetoric, Latin, theology. They taught him how to take a premise and just dissect it from every possible angle. He fell in love with literature there, but he also developed this biting, satirical edge.
So naturally, his father looks at this bright, sharp-tongued kid and says, great, you're smart. You're going to be a lawyer.
And Zozo was not having it.
Not even a little bit.
No. He famously told his father, I want to be a man of letters. And his father replied with something that probably a lot of parents of artists throughout history can relate to. He said, that is the profession of a man who wishes to be useless to society, a burden to his family, and to die of hunger.
Harsh, but probably a fair assessment of the poetry market in, 1710?
Probably. So young Francois pretended to work as a notary's assistant in Paris.
Pretended?
In reality, he was spending his days writing satirical verses and his nights hanging out with freethinkers and libertines in the Temple Society.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And when his father caught him, he tried to break the habit by sending him to study law out in Normandy. But, you can't stop a writer from writing. He kept producing essays and historical studies, and his wit started getting him invited to these aristocratic dinner parties. He was the funny guy you wanted at your table.
But in the 18th century, under an absolute monarchy, wit is. It's a dangerous game. He wasn't just cracking dad jokes. He was making powerful enemies.
Serious enemies. And his father saw it coming. In 1713, his dad tried to get him out of the line of fire by sending him to the Netherlands to work as a secretary for the French ambassador.
A fresh start?
Supposed to be. A way to get serious about a diplomatic career. Instead, it turned into a total soap opera. Voltaire fell madly in love with a French Protestant refugee named Catherine Olympe Dunoyer.
Known to history as Pimpette.
Pimpette. It sounds ridiculous now, but this was a passionate, scandalous affair. You have to understand the context. A French Catholic official's secretary
Right.
running around with a Protestant refugee whose mother was a known journalist and a critic of France. The ambassador was horrified. He put Voltaire under house arrest.
And Voltaire, being Voltaire, probably didn't just sit there quietly.
No, he actually tried to organize a breakout. He was going to smuggle Pimpette out of the country disguised in men's clothing.
It's like a bad rom-com.
It ended poorly. He was sent packing back to Paris by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But the real trouble, the kind of trouble that changes your life, that started in 1717.
Okay.
The king, Louis XIV, had died, and the regent, the Duke of Orleans, was running the country. And Voltaire wrote a satirical verse suggesting that the regent was having an incestuous relationship with his own daughter.
Okay, that is not something you tweet out lightly. That's accusing the acting head of state of a mortal sin and a crime.
Exactly. And in the ancient regime, there's no First Amendment. There's no freedom of the press. The consequence was the Bastille.
11 months.
11 months. And we need to strip away any romantic image of the imprisoned poet here. The Bastille was terrifying. He was in a windowless cell with walls 10 feet thick.
10 feet thick. The sensory deprivation alone would break most people.
It was designed to break people. Cold, damp, silent. But this is where you see the resilience of his mind. He didn't have paper or ink for a lot of the time.
So what did he do?
He composed poetry in his head. He memorized lines, rearranging them mentally. While locked in that stone box, he wrote his debut play, Oedipe.
A retelling of the Oedipus myth, which is, I mean, pretty appropriately tragic given his situation.
Right. And when he finally got out, the play was staged, and it was a massive financial and critical success. He went into prison a troublemaker and came out the most celebrated playwright in France. And this is the moment in 1718 where he decides he needs a new identity to match his new status. He drops Arouet, which he thought was too common, too bourgeois, and he adopts the name Voltaire.
This is one of the great literary mysteries. Scholars have spent 300 years arguing over where this name came from. I love a good origin story theory. What are the leading options?
Okay, so the most, let's say, mathematically sound theory is that it's an anagram.
An anagram.
Yeah. If you take the Latinized spelling of his surname, Arouetso, A-R-O-V-E-T, and you add the letters L-I for le jeune, meaning the young.
Oruvalidi.
Right. Scramble those letters and you get Voltaire.
That feels a little Scrabble-Y for genius, doesn't it? It's a bit dry.
It is a distinctly intellectual puzzle, which is very fitting for him. But there are other theories. Some say it reverses the syllables of Ervalt, his family's hometown. But the biographer Richard Holmes suggests something more psychological. He thinks the sound of the word itself conveys speed and daring. Think of French words like voltige.
Acrobatic.
Or volte-face. Spinning around to face your enemies.
That sounds more like the man we're talking about. I am the acrobat of wit. Plus, let's be honest, Arouet sounds a lot like Arouet.
Which means to be beaten up.
Or broken on the wheel.
Which is deeply ironic because getting beaten up is exactly what led to his next major transformation. He was trying to distance himself from his family, signal this new, noble identity, but the aristocracy was not going to let him forget his roots.
And this brings us to the feud that changed everything, the incident with the Chevalier de Rohan-Chabot.
Right. This is 1726. Voltaire is at the height of his fame. He's at the opera holding court. And this Rohan-Chabot, who's a really arrogant aristocrat, starts mocking him publicly. He asks sneeringly, "Who is this young man who doesn't have a name?"
Implying he's a nobody, a commoner pretending to be somebody.
Exactly. And Voltaire, sharp as ever, shoots back, "My name is one that I am beginning to honor, while you are sullying yours."
Ouch. That is a burn that echoes through the centuries. I'm guessing the Chevalier didn't take that well.
No. In his world, a commoner insulting a nobleman is a violation of the natural order of things. A few days later, Voltaire is dining at a friend's house. He gets called outside.
It's a setup.
Total setup. He steps onto the street, and Rohan's lackeys, his hired thugs, beat Voltaire with canes, while the aristocrat watches from his carriage, shouting instructions like, "Don't hit his head, something good might come out of it."
That is just It's so humiliating. And this is the harsh reality of the ancien regime. You could be the smartest man in France, but if you don't have the bloodline, you're nothing.
Exactly. Voltaire wants justice. He goes to the police. They do nothing. He goes to his noble friends. They all turn their backs on him. They basically say, look, he's a Rohan, you're a poet. Know your place.
So what does he do?
He takes fencing lessons. He challenges Rohan to a duel.
He's ready to die for his dignity.
He is. But the Rohan family is powerful. They just snap their fingers, get a letter de cachet from the king, and Voltaire is arrested and thrown into the Bastille again.
No trial. Just pure power.
And this is the pivot point. He realizes France offers him zero protection. So, fearing he'd be locked up indefinitely, he requested permission to go into exile instead.
They said yes.
The authorities agreed. They just wanted him gone. So in May 1726, he was escorted to Calais and put on a boat to England.
And this seems like it could have been a total tragedy, exile from the center of culture, but it turns out to be the making of him.
Completely. It was his great awakening. He lands in England, and it's a profound culture shock. He goes from French absolutism, where you can be jailed for a poem,
Right.
to the land of constitutional monarchy and relative civil liberty. England had already gone through its revolution. They had a parliament. They had habeas corpus. He realized a society could exist where the king didn't have absolute power over the bodies of his subjects.
And he hung out with some heavy hitters there, too. He wasn't just, sulking in a pub somewhere.
No, he integrated immediately. He lived in Wandsworth and Covent Garden. He met Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels, and Alexander Pope. He was fascinated by the English language and learned to read and write it fluently very quickly. And he discovered Shakespeare.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but he had mixed feelings about Shakespeare, right?
He did. You have to remember, French drama at the time was very rigid. Strict rhyming couplets, unity of time and place, very polite.
And Shakespeare is not that.
Shakespeare is messy. There are ghosts, clowns, sword fights, blood. Voltaire found Shakespeare a bit barbaric and vulgar compared to the polished French style. But he admitted Shakespeare had an energy and a force that French drama lacked, so he introduced Shakespeare to the French public, even if he tried to clean him up a bit in translation.
And beyond literature, he met people connected to Isaac Newton.
Yes, Newton is absolutely key here. Newton had just died when Voltaire arrived. Voltaire actually went to Newton's funeral at Westminster Abbey, and he saw a scientist being buried with the honors of a king. In France, scientists and writers were often buried in unmarked graves or treated with suspicion. In England, they were national heroes.
And you know that famous story about the apple falling on Newton's head?
The gravity moment?
Voltaire is largely responsible for making that story famous.
That's right. He met Newton's niece, Catherine Conduit, in London, and she's the one who told him the anecdote about the apple. Voltaire thought it was brilliant.
Why?
Because it perfectly illustrated the idea of observing nature to understand universal laws. He put it in his writings, and it went viral, 18th century style.
He was obsessed with Newton's science because it was based on observation and reason, unlike the dominant philosophy in France at the time.
Right. France was still sticking with René Descartes. Now, Descartes was brilliant, but his physics was based on abstract reasoning vortices and swirls of matter, not empirical data. Newton had the math. He had observation. Voltaire realized that Newton's method wasn't just about gravity, it was a whole way of thinking. It was about evidence. It was about testing reality rather than just accepting tradition.
So he soaks all this up, English liberty, Newton science, religious tolerance, and he decides to write a book about it. Letters Concerning the English Nation.
Which was basically a love letter to England and a massive slap in the face to France.
I can imagine.
He praised the British government for respecting human rights. He famously noted that in England you have many religions and they all live in peace. He wrote, "If there were only one religion in England, there would be danger of tyranny. If there were two, they would cut each other's throats. But there are 30 and they live happily together in peace."
That is such a profound observation, that pluralism creates peace, while monoculture creates tyranny.
Exactly. And when the book was published in France in 1734, it caused a massive scandal. The government ordered the book to be publicly burned by the hangman.
Burning books, always the sign of a secure, stable government with nothing to hide.
Precisely. And Voltaire, knowing the drill by now, knew that burning the author usually follows burning the book. So he had to flee Paris again to avoid arrest.
And this leads to one of the most fascinating partnerships in literary history.
Yeah.
He basically runs into the arms of Émilie du Châtelet.
The Marquise du Châtelet. And we absolutely cannot overstate her importance. For so long, history just treated her as Voltaire's mistress.
Right.
That is a massive disservice. She was his intellectual equal, and in mathematics and physics, his superior.
And she was married.
Yes, married to the Marquis du Châtelet, a military man who was often away. It was a very 18th century arrangement. The husband was pretty understanding. Voltaire used his own money to renovate the husband's estate, the Château de Cirey, out in Champagne. He added a wing, built a laboratory.
They basically turned it into a private research institute. I love this image. They collected 21,000 books. That's more than most universities had at the time.
It was an enormous collection. And they didn't just read, they worked. They performed scientific experiments together. They were trying to determine the nature of fire, literally weighing burning wood to see if fire had mass.
And they were instrumental in bringing Newton to France.
Oh, they were the champions of Newtonian physics. Émilie du Châtelet translated Newton's Principia Mathematica from Latin into French. And she didn't just translate the words, she added her own commentary and mathematical proofs clarifying Newton's really complex ideas.
Wow.
To this day, her translation is the standard French version of Newton.
So you have the two of them holed up in this chateau, doing physics experiments, writing plays, and also analyzing the Bible.
That was their other massive project. They applied their critical, logical minds to the Bible. They went through it verse by verse, treating it not as the divine, untouchable Word of God, but as a historical text. They pointed out contradictions, historical anachronisms, moral failings. And this period at Cirey really solidified Voltaire's arguments for the separation of church and state. He saw how religious dogma held back scientific progress.
But eventually, the quiet life at the chateau got a little stifling. And the new character enters the chat, Frederick the Great of Prussia.
The philosopher king. Frederick was a huge fan of Voltaire. They had been writing these incredibly flattering letters to each other for years.
So Frederick is courting him.
Aggressively. He wanted to be seen as an enlightened monarch, a poet king. So in 1750, after Emily tragically died in childbirth, which was a devastating blow to Voltaire, he accepted Frederick's invitation to move to Berlin.
And he got the royal treatment, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. A massive salary, a title, rooms in the Palace Sanssouci. It was the honeymoon phase. Voltaire wrote Micromegas there, which is this wild story.
The one about the aliens.
Yeah, it's essentially early science fiction about a giant alien from the star Sirius visiting Earth to witness human folly.
Aliens. In 1750, that's incredible.
It's a remarkable work. The alien is just massive, and he looks at humans as if we're insects. It's a perspective trick. It shows how small our wars and our religious disputes look from the outside. But as always with Voltaire, the peace didn't last. He and Frederick were two massive egos in one small palace.
And Voltaire got involved in some shady business.
He got involved in a financial scandal with Saxon government bonds. It was essentially insider trading or speculation that was technically illegal for someone in his position.
Right.
It was accused of theft and forgery by a financier. It was messy, and it really embarrassed Frederick.
That doesn't sound very philosophical.
It wasn't. It was greedy. But the real breaking point was a feud with the president of the Berlin Academy, a man named Maupertuis.
Okay.
Maupertuis was a scientist who had some odd theories. He proposed that the Earth was flattened at the poles like a pumpkin, which was correct.
Right.
But he also had these wilder ideas about proving the existence of God through math. And Voltaire just couldn't resist. He wrote a savage satire called The Diatribe of Dr. Akakia, just mocking Maupertuis mercilessly.
And Frederick, being the king and the boss of the academy, probably didn't find that funny.
He was furious. He defended his academy president. He ordered all copies of the satire to be burned. And Voltaire resigned his post and tried to leave Prussia.
And this is where it turns into a thriller movie. The Frankfurt Incident.
It is so bizarre. Voltaire is on his way home, and Frederick's agents stop him in the city of Frankfurt. They hold him hostage for weeks. They ransack his luggage. They treat him like a common criminal.
What were they looking for? State secrets? Military codes?
A book of poetry.
A book of poetry.
Yes. Frederick had lent Voltaire a privately printed book of his own satirical verse, some of which was quite racy and politically indiscreet. And Frederick was terrified that Voltaire, who is now his enemy, would publish it and embarrass him across Europe.
So he was held prisoner over a poetry collection.
Yes, it was just petty tyranny, and Voltaire, never one to let a grudge go, later wrote these memoirs where he just mocked Frederick's private life, explicitly referencing the king's homosexuality. Yeah, he described how Frederick would invite young, handsome soldiers for coffee and then withdraw for a quickie. He burned that bridge to the ground.
Voltaire played dirty when he had to.
He absolutely did, but eventually he escaped the Prussian sphere. He couldn't go back to Paris because the King of France had banned him.
Yeah.
He tried Geneva, but the strict Calvinists there hated theater, and Voltaire loved theater.
So he was stuck.
For a bit. But then he did something really smart. He bought an estate at Ferney, right on the French-Swiss border.
This is his final act, the Patriarch of Ferney.
And it's important to note here, he is incredibly wealthy by now. This is a key point people often forget. Voltaire was a capitalist. He made a fortune in that lottery scheme early on, but also in international trade, lending to aristocrats, and in manufacturing.
So he was independently wealthy.
Which gave him the freedom to say whatever he wanted. He didn't need a patron anymore.
And he used that freedom to become a crusader. This is where we get the Calas affair.
This is perhaps his finest hour. It's the story of Jean Calas, a Protestant merchant living in Toulouse. In 1761, his son was found dead, hanging in the family shop. It was a suicide.
Okay.
But the local rumors started swirling that the son had planned to convert to Catholicism and that the father had murdered him to stop it.
That is a horrific accusation.
It was a witch hunt. There was no evidence. But because Calas was Protestant in a deeply Catholic area, the mob mentality just took over. Calas was arrested, tortured on the wheel, his limbs were broken with iron bars, and finally executed. He maintained his innocence until his last breath.
Unbelievable.
And Voltaire heard about this. And he didn't just write a sad poem about it. He went to work.
What did he do?
He treated it like a modern court case investigation. He interviewed witnesses. He studied the legal documents. He used his fame, his connections, and his pen to frame this not just as a miscarriage of justice, but as a clear case of religious fanaticism destroying an innocent family. He campaigned for years. He wrote letters to every monarch in Europe.
And it worked.
It worked. In 1765, 3 years after Calas was executed, the King's Council in Paris annulled the conviction. They declared Calas innocent. It was too late for Jean Calas, but it saved the rest of his family and restored their property.
That's incredible, an intellectual overturning a court verdict through public pressure.
It was the birth of the modern public intellectual, and this is when he started signing his letters with that famous phrase, écraser l'infâme.
Crush the infamous.
Crush the infamous. He meant crush the organized intolerance that kills innocent men like Jean Calas.
And somewhere in the middle of all this, he writes his greatest hit, Candide.
1759, Candide. It is a masterpiece of satire. He wrote it in 3 days or so, he claimed.
3 days.
It's a direct attack on the philosophy of optimism. There was a philosopher named Leibniz who argued that because God is perfect, this world he created must be the best of all possible worlds.
Which, if you look around history, or even just read the news today, is a hard sell.
Voltaire thought it was absurd and dangerous because it encourages passivity. If this is the best possible world, why try to fix anything? In the book, the character Candide goes through every horrible disaster imaginable: war, earthquake, torture, shipwreck, while his tutor, Dr. Pangloss, just keeps smiling and saying, "It's all for the best."
And it ends with that famous line.
We must cultivate our garden. It's a rejection of that high-minded, passive optimism. It says, look, the world is crazy and cruel and we can't explain it. So let's stop theorizing and focus on doing practical, tangible good in our own small sphere. Work, build, help your neighbor, cultivate the garden.
Which is great advice. But now we have to look at the weeds in Voltaire's own garden, because for all this talk of tolerance and justice, when you look at the source material on his views on race and religion, it gets complicated. We can't just canonize him as a saint.
No, and we absolutely shouldn't. We have to be honest about the darker side of the Enlightenment. Let's start with religion. Voltaire was a deist. He wasn't an atheist.
Right.
He famously wrote, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him.
Which sounds cynical, but he meant it as a check against chaos, right? A social utility.
Yes. He believed in a supreme intelligence, a watchmaker who built the universe. But he believed that after creating the world, God sort of stepped back. He hated the institutions, the church, the rituals, the dogmas. He thought Christianity was often ridiculous and bloody. But, he also acknowledged the good work of nuns and hospitals. He wasn't one-dimensional.
But then you look at his views on Islam. He wrote that play, Muhammad.
Muhammad. In this play, he portrays the prophet Muhammad as a schemer, a fanatic, and an imposter who uses religion to manipulate people. It is incredibly harsh and historically inaccurate.
So is this just pure Islamophobia, or has something else going on?
It's complex. A lot of scholars point out that he was often using Islam as a proxy to attack religious fanaticism in general, specifically Catholic fanaticism.
Ah, okay.
He couldn't write a play about the Pope being a manipulator without going to prison again, so he set the play in Mecca. It was a subtweet in the form of a tragedy.
But did his views soften over time?
They did. Later in life, in his historical work Essay on the Manners, his view evolved. He recognized Muhammad as a great legislator and a conqueror who reformed Arabia and abolished idolatry. He respected the historical impact, even if he still criticized the use of religion for war.
Okay, so then there's his view on Judaism. The sources say that 30 of the 118 articles in his philosophical dictionary deal negatively with Jews.
This is a subject of huge debate among historians. He describes the Jewish people in some places as ignorant and barbarous, and writes that they unite the most sordid avarice with the most detestable superstition.
That sounds like straight-up anti-Semitism.
It reads that way. Some experts argue he was being anti-biblical, that he was attacking the roots of Christianity by attacking Judaism. If you can discredit the Old Testament, you undermine the New Testament.
I see the logic, but...
But others point to his personal financial disputes with Jewish financiers in Prussia and London as fueling a genuine personal prejudice.
Did anyone call him out on it at the time?
Yes. A Jewish intellectual named Isaac de Pinto wrote to him, essentially saying, "You are fighting for tolerance, yet you slander an entire people." And Voltaire wrote back this dismissive non-apology. He said, "I was wrong to attribute to a whole nation the vices of some individuals," but he continued to publish the attacks.
You didn't change it.
He promised to revise the objectionable passages, but he never really did.
And finally, race and slavery. This is where the modern reader really struggles with it.
Yeah. Voltaire was a polygynist. He believed that different races had separate origins. He did not view Black Africans as sharing the same natural humanity or ancestry as white Europeans. He wrote about African intelligence in ways that are, by today's standards, scientifically racist.
But didn't he write against slavery in Candide?
He did. There's that famous devastating scene where Candide meets a mutilated slave in Suriname, a man missing a hand and a leg. And the slave says, "This is the price at which you eat sugar in Europe." It's a powerful, visceral condemnation of the consumer's complicity in the slave trade.
So he writes that, but then...
Yeah. Then, historical records suggest that Voltaire may have invested his own money in the French Compagnie des Indes and other colonial enterprises that trafficked in goods produced by slave labor.
So he profited from the very system he satirized.
That is the paradox. He fought for the oppressed Jean Calas, but held views that dehumanized entire continents. He championed liberty, but courted absolute monarchs like Frederick and Catherine the Great. He was a man of his time who managed to see beyond his time in some ways, but remained trapped in it in others.
It's a lot to reconcile.
Yeah.
But let's fast forward to the end, 1778. He returns to Paris after 25 years of exile.
And it was a hero's welcome. He was 83 years old. The excitement was so intense it basically killed him.
Really?
He was mobbed in the streets. He went to the theater to see his latest play, and the actors crowned a bust of him on stage. The crowd went wild.
And the deathbed rumors are legendary.
Oh, everyone had a story. The church wanted him to recant. His enemies circulated stories that he died in agony, screaming, terrified of hell. His friends said he was calm and defiant.
And there's that famous story.
Yes, likely apocryphal, but it's just so perfect. A priest supposedly asked him to renounce Satan, and Voltaire replied, "This is no time to make new enemies."
Classic.
But he died on May 30th, 1778. And because he had never formally reconciled with the church, he was denied a Christian burial in Paris. The archbishop banned it.
So what did they do with the body?
His nephew and friends had to prop his body up in a carriage, dress it in clothes as if he were still alive.
A sort of Weekend at Bernie's situation.
Exactly. And they smuggled him out of Paris to an abbey in Champagne where the abbot was friendly. They buried him quickly before the official order to stop it arrived.
But the last laugh was his.
It was. During the French Revolution in 1791, the new government dug him up. They brought him back to Paris in this massive triumphal procession. They enshrined him in the Pantheon, the resting place of national heroes. An estimated 1 million people lined the streets to watch his coffin pass.
Wow.
And the inscription on his sarcophagus read, "He taught us to be free."
Talk about a comeback. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, we have to bust one major myth. The quote. You know the one. It's on every coffee mug and T-shirt associated with free speech.
I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
It is the quintessential Voltaire quote.
And he never said it. He never wrote it.
That is heartbreaking. Where on earth does it come from?
It was written by a British biographer named Evelyn Beatrice Hall in 1906. She was trying to summarize Voltaire's attitude toward a specific censorship case. She wrote that phrase to describe his mindset, but people mistook it for a direct quote.
It's a good summary, though.
It is perfect. It captures his spirit, even if it's not his pen. It encapsulates that drive to fight for the rights of even those you disagree with.
So we're left with this incredibly complex picture. A man of contradictions.
A man who was a courtier to kings, but a champion of civil rights. A wealthy capitalist who fought for the oppressed. A man of deep, deep prejudices who somehow became the global symbol of tolerance.
It brings us back to that idea of the garden. He wasn't perfect. His garden had plenty of weeds, some very ugly ones, but he never stopped cultivating it. He never stopped fighting la femme.
And he left us with a challenge. Voltaire wrote, "Superstition sets the whole world in flames. Philosophy quenches them."
That feels incredibly relevant right now. In our age of information overload, misinformation, and online witch hunts, the question is, have we found the water, or are we just adding new fuel to the fire?
That is the question.
Something to think about as you cultivate your own garden. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Until next time.